the chairs out. I put a couple extra out. Feel free to grab some, and I'm gonna grab these others behind you guys.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. The very background. Must be really bad. Want to move up, and you can stand right here for you. All right, we are going to get started in just a little bit. If anyone is wondering, there is a restroom on this floor. It is through the archway. You're going to see a couch to the right, and that's a right from right there. We are going to see if anyone else joins us, but a couple minutes, we'll go ahead and get started.
Is this a factory building?
This was a hardware store.
Big one?
Big full story one. I'll probably tell you.
It was Merritt's Hardware. It was 4 stories, basement. It was like Lowe's, vertical Lowe's.
I've never heard it called vertical Lowe's.
Vertical Lowe's, that's what I remember coming in here as a kid. Calvin, you remember coming in here, wherever Calvin is?
No, I do not.
We've got a lot of stories about when it used to consign a bunch of different things.
Yeah, we got almost walking
Bicycles used
down
to
Main
hang from the
Street.
ceiling. A woman named Winky down in the basement used to sell pocket knives. A lot of weird stuff used to go on in this hardware store.
There was an opera house across the street, an opera house in
Yeah,
that
that's
area,
amazing.
across the street.
I can't imagine her in an opera house.
Well, there was an opera house that did a little bit of everything.
Right, that's what I said, yeah, it's like an event center, basically.
What's the elevation here? I know we're in the
About
mountains.
1,000 maybe, we're about 1,000 feet.
Is that all?
Yeah, I think the Blue Ridge are about 3,000, so I think we're about 2, maybe below them, so I think the Blue Ridge are 3,000, I think.
Yeah, before you head out, go up the stairs right here, one flight up. It's a big 360 view. You'll see all the mountains around you. So you'll kind of see we're at the dip. And you'll see the one big mountain right across this Tyler Mountain. It's not part of the Blue Ridge. It's its own special mountain by itself.
The stairs and go through the roof.
Oh, okay.
See right through that window.
You can look down the street, talking about what it used to be building wrong.
Used to say that was a freight elevator.
And Belts is right across the street, because it's got a big granite sign that says Belts. If you're sitting in the right window, if you're sitting in the right seat here, you can see it. It says Belts. The Granite and Hyatt Furniture was the Opera House. Can't believe you didn't bring a dog.
Yeah, we were kind of all looking forward to seeing the
Yeah,
dog.
I had them all psyched about Mason.
Oh, that y'all signs scared me off.
Let's see if I can find him.
I think it's towards the back.
We don't
I think.
Oh,
276 right up.
yeah, there you go. I'm glad, look here, you know what page he's on, you know? 276. And, I kid you not, Mason is in my book. I kid you not, there's that dog. Well, I saw him every year. It's got to where I saw him every year at Mayberry Days, so I put him in the book. And she won the trivia contest. Your daughter won the trivia contest for kids one time, and that's how I met Mason the dog. So has everybody had fun? I assume y'all all here for Mayberry Days except me and Calvin. Me and Calvin here sell books, ain't that right? Calvin has what? 2 books related to Mayberry, 3 books related to Mayberry. And the only reason I'm telling you that is because Calvin shows up at everything I do, and I appreciate it that you show up.
Well, you're one of the most interesting persons and wonderful historian.
Oh, you don't have to suck up that much.
I'm just telling it like it is.
You gotta buy another book now.
It's okay, he'll come to your speaking and do the same thing.
The last time Calvin did the book sign, and I showed up, and Calvin wasn't there, so I sat down and I started selling his books to people. He comes walking in, there I am in his chair. That's a true story.
How did he do it?
I didn't really sell any of them, I just pretended like I was gonna sell some. Oh, man. This is my third talk in 24 hours. I did a talk about moonshine yesterday morning for the Rurikins in Ararat. I did a talk about the Dinky Railroad at the Jim Stewart birthplace yesterday afternoon. And this poor man has been to every one of them.
Yeah, on your moonshine talk, did you talk about any of the volunteers right now?
No, we didn't talk about none of your people, Calvin. We didn't talk about none of your people. I'll post that this week. We recorded it. I'll post it this week.
There's a display on the next floor down there.
Yeah, it's got, yeah. Donna Fargo's granddaddy. And he's probably your granddaddy too, isn't
He's
he?
my grandfather.
He's your grandfather, yeah. You got any free samples you want?
I don't do free samples, but I like to pick you up.
Well, if you had some free samples, we'd really have a program this afternoon. Imagine me with some of that and doing it, oh boy. Calvin, I don't know if you, the reason I'm here is right here. My grandparents came to Mount Airy in the late 1940s. She knitted socks and he fixed the machines. They came from Chattanooga, Tennessee, brought their 3 children to Mount Airy, and they worked in every sock mill here in this town at least once, I think, at least once. But that's I was just thinking that's the reason I'm even here. Otherwise, I'd be a Tennessee Volunteer fan or something.
Well, you know, they've got Paul McCraw working on those, and I think he's got one of them working.
Is one of them working, Sam?
I think.
Not quite, we got one that we can get the parts to move, but it's gonna take a little bit more work. But we got 2 that are up for contention to be able to run for exhibit again.
I'm not gonna tell who Paul is. Paul McCraw.
You tell them. I don't know that I know Paul.
Andy's first cousin.
He's who?
Andy's first
Oh, he's
cousin.
Andy's first
Married
cousin.
to
I didn't know
Hazel.
that.
Married to Hazel.
Okay.
A pianist,
Mhm.
also the church
Okay.
pianist from the show.
I'm more into Andy's Virginia crowd. I'm more into the Virginia, and we'll make jokes about that. Andy Griffith's mother was a nun. No, she wasn't Catholic. She was from Kibler Valley. Kibler Valley. Their name was Nun. N-U-N-N. She wasn't a Catholic nun. She was a Kibler Valley nun. So before you start doing Touchdown Jesus and all that Notre Dame stuff, she was a nun. And there are still nuns up there around Kibler Valley. Kibler's where the Dan River comes out of the mountain, and I think that's where Andy gets most of his musical side. Is from his mother's family. But it never fails that somebody doesn't laugh when I say Andy Griffith's mother was a nun. What time is it, Cassandra?
We're about 7 after. Should I go ahead and get started?
Yeah,
Or
we
wait a
will
little bit
start,
longer?
we'll start. Whatever you
You'll
want.
always have stragglers, we'll welcome if they come on in. Alright, before Tom gets started with this presentation today, my name is Cassandra. I'm the Programs and Education Director here at the museum. And I want to thank you all for coming out and joining us on this Sunday, celebrating Mayberry Days with us. This is our very first history talk of the season. We do at least 4 or 5 of these a year. We keep them free for members of the community, people visiting the community, whoever you are. We are always welcome to have you, and we are always welcome to share some part of our history with you and making sure that is available and free to the public. So before we get started, I just want to thank you all for coming out and joining us. Tom will tell you a little bit more about it, but he also has several books that he has published and wrote himself here. So I hope you enjoy the presentation and ask him plenty of questions. You can tell he loves to chit chat. He will happily accept those questions, and we hope you learn a lot with us today. Sorry I look like this. I meant to change. I rescue birds as a hobby, and I got called in for a young red-tailed hawk who got in some trouble this morning. So I look a little dingy.
She's very excited. She has a new goat too. She's very excited.
I have 2 goats now. They're eating everything I own.
Don't let them get loaded though, okay?
I had not heard about that episode of the Andy Griffith Griffith Show, and Tom had to tell me about it as I'm showing him pictures of my goats.
And there's a restaurant across the street almost, right?
Yeah,
Couple
over there,
of-
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
All right, thank y'all for coming. Who's the farthest away? I know we got Alabama right here. Anybody farther than that?
Florida, Central Florida.
Yeah, okay, that's good, man. It was a pleasure to be here today. I'm gonna talk about everything but the Andy Griffith Show, in a weird sort of way. This is a real history talk about Andy Griffith, and I wrote the original version of this book, over a decade ago, and I was recovering from cancer surgery, and I had Amy, who's a curator here in the museum, brought home everything that the museum had about Andy Griffith. It was a stack of paper about like this, and I wrote the first version of this book from that. I did it as a lark, because I needed something to focus on, recovering from surgery. And of course, it ends up being the best-selling book I've ever had. I decided that if you put him on the cover of a blank book, you could sell it. I'm just gonna say, keep that thought in mind, Cal. Why make you do that? We can collaborate on that. Joint authorship, blank book. This is Carl and Geneva, Andy's parents. This is Andy Griffith's 31st birthday, 1957. It was Andy Griffith Day here in Mount Airy, and they had a parade for him on Main Street, similar to what you probably sit through in the rain yesterday. And he looks pretty happy there, and you can figure out, I guess he's got his mama's chin and all that. But what he gets from these two, and I say this all the time, I really believe this, he gets his music from his mother's side of the family, and he gets the storytelling from his father's side. From everything I've ever heard about Carl Griffith, who worked in the furniture factory here in Mount Airy, ran a saw, he was one of the greatest storytellers who ever was. He apparently was so good that his daughter-in-law, Andy's first wife, Barbara, said that Carl Griffith was the funniest man she ever knew. Look who she's married to. Carl Griffith is the funniest man she ever knew. And like I said, this is when they were releasing A Face in the Crowd, the movie he did with Ealing Kazan. And you do movies with Ealing Kazan, that's big time. That's Marlon Brando, all that sort of thing. Andy had just released this, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this is 1957. It was his birthday, June the 1st. He was born in 1926. He was born down here about where Pine Street and South Street come together, pretty close to the Amish grocery store. Not the house up on Haymore, which he lived in, but he was born down on South Street. And the house is no longer there. It's where Mittman's garage, pretty close to where Mittman's garage is. But he almost, we didn't have Mayberry Days. Come in, folks. Because Andy, as a baby, they moved to Ohio. And I don't know if Columbus, Ohio would have quite the Mayberry panache that Mount Airy does. But they moved to Ohio for a while, and they came back. To live here in Mount Airy. Please come in and have a seat, folks, if you want to. This is Andy's mom and dad. We're just talking about him. I just gave birth to him, so y'all come on in and sit down. He was born on the same day as Marilyn Monroe, just to give you some useless information about Andy Griffith. Marilyn Monroe and Andy Griffith. I bet y'all never thought about that in the same sentence before, had you? Yeah. But like I said, it's Andy Griffith Day, the premiere of Face in the Crowd. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in this a little bit is there's lots of myths and stories around Mount Airy about Andy. One of the stories you always hear is that nobody showed up for this parade, and Andy got mad. That's one of the reasons he never came back. Well, that's not true. I have a letter Andy wrote to the mayor of Mount Airy thanking him for it. And there's all kinds of pictures where there's a good crowd at this parade. It was not one of those things where he got mad and didn't show up. We have a lot of that negativity sometimes going around Mount Airy, and I'm going to try to knock a little of that down today. But he looks pretty happy to me in that picture. His mother, most of the time, she would work at what we call the Wiener Burger, which was down there where the hospital is, just down the hill, I think, from where her house was. I think it's down where the Red Barn is. I think that's where it was, near the hospital. But anyways, so I wrote this book. You know, it's part biography about Andy. It's also part memoir about Mount Airy. And while I was writing it, Andy Griffith died. And I thought, well, here's a chance. And I went around all that weekend talking to people. We had CNN here, and all these major networks rolled in and covered it because, you know, he had passed away on Friday, July the 3rd. Don Knox had preceded him in death. And it was a great opportunity to just go around and talk to people about what Andy Griffith meant to them, or what they thought about him, that sort of thing. So I did. And the first place I went to see my father, who's here on the left. And of course, this is Russell Hyatt, the gentleman who you might know as the real Floyd the Barber. Russell and my father grew up together. And I would take my father into Floyd's barber shop, and I'd just sit down and listen to him. And I'd learn more about Mount Airy history in an hour just listening to them two than I could in any book, probably. But my dad and Russell, and you see them there, they're engaged in deep discussion, probably about what game they're betting on tomorrow or something. But my father lived down on Pine Street, and where Todd Harris lives today. And my father was quite the extrovert. He was just full of himself, and he had the best lie of any man I ever saw. Here you go, Cassandra. My father's name was Erie, E-R-I-E. If he met you, he would tell you that he was irresistible.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
He had more game at 80 than I ever had. So I went up to visit my father on July the 3rd. He was about 80 years old then. And I told him, I said, Andy Griffith died. And he said, yeah, I saw that. He says, you know, I went to high school with him. This is the first time in my life I had heard these words come out of my father's mouth. I went to high school with Andy Griffith. My father was a little bit younger than Andy, but he knew him. And there's a lot of similarities. They both grew up very poor here in Mount Airy. Their parents worked in the factories. And I think Daddy maybe related to Andy more than I ever thought about. So I said, well, did you ever see him after he became famous? And my father said, oh yeah. He said, you weren't even in school yet. I think it's about 1966. I was at the hospital pharmacy, which was right across from where our hospital is. I was standing in line to get some medicine, and Bob Smith, the pharmacist, looked up and said, well, hello, Andy. And my father said, I turned around, Tom, and there was Andy Griffith standing right behind me in line. He was getting his mama's medicine. Geneva lived about a block up the street from there. And I said, well, what'd you say to him? And my father said, son, I was so flabbergasted that Andy Griffith was standing in front of me, I was speechless. My father was never speechless in his entire life. I should have known better. I said, well, what did he say to you? And he said, this is a true story. He says, son, Irresistible was standing in front of him. He was speechless too. That's a true story. So he was the first person I went around and asked what they thought about Andy Griffith on the day that he died. And he didn't know him too well, but he did know Russell well. And the two of them were quite a thing. Now, when I was a kid, the barbershop now was much bigger than it is today. There was multiple chairs in that place. It went way back into what would be the snappy lunch. But now it's a little shorter. It's 2 chairs, no waiting. I think back then it was 6 or 8 chairs, no waiting. But my grandfather used to carry me in there to get my hair cut. His name was Erie too. I don't know if he was irresistible, but his name was Erie. And he worked on those machines, like I said, right there. He came here in the late 40s with his 3 children, and my father was the oldest. My Aunt Shirley didn't like for me to tell this, but I love telling this. My grandpa, he liked to drink. And he would go up on Main Street in Mount Airy, and he would get him a pretty big old snootful, and he would walk down Pine Street home. Well, they would call my grandmother and tell her that he was coming down the street. And if you were the oldest grandchild, your job was to meet him and get him home safe. And for this, he would give you a Kennedy $50. When my grandfather died, I had a box of Kennedy $50. I don't know that he was Otis, but he was trying hard. He was trying hard. One thing we don't talk about with Andy. Andy's mother was Geneva Nunn, and she named her son, he's not Andrew, he's Andy Samuel Nunn. And he's named, I think, for her uncle. It was this fellow right here, you can barely make him out. His name was Andy Nunn, and he fought in the Civil War. He fought in 26 North Carolina. He lost a leg at Antietam, and I believe she named her son after him. He's named after him and her father, so it's Andy Samuel Griffith. And he lost a leg. He's buried up in Clawville, Virginia, right beside the Clawville Cafe. So if you ever go to Clawville, Virginia, and stop at the Clawville Cafe, you can probably figure out where Andy's notable ancestor is buried. He fought with Stonewall Jackson in the Valley Campaign, and like I said, he lost a leg at Antietam, Sharpsburg, Southern Persuasion. I'm always hesitant to tell this because if I tell everybody that Andy Griffith is named after a Confederate soldier, some genius will want to go take the statue down at him and Obie going to the fishing game. Like I said, he was born down here on South Street, then went to Ohio, they came back. Here's Geneva, Carl, another picture of him. And little Andy, as a little baby here in Mount Airy, he didn't have a crib, they put him supposedly in the Chester drawer, they pulled the drawer out, and that was his bed for the first little while he was born, after he was born. Andy grew up here, you know, they were poor. They were not wealthy people. Carl, like I said, worked in the factory, furniture factory. His mother worked in many places, I think, but I noticed she worked at what we call the Wienerburger. They did a play here last night. Mark Brown wrote about Andy's mom and dad. He and his wife play Andy's mom and dad in this play they did last night. And the thing I remember about this play last night is Carl Griffith is quoted as saying, "I will never eat another hot dog again as long as I live," because she brought him home from the Wienerburger. But there's a picture of baby Andy with his mom and daddy. The train station was right there across the street where he was born. This is the Mayberry Trading Post. It's up on the Blue Ridge Parkway. There's a little community up there called Mayberry. A lot of times you wonder, where does Andy get the name Mayberry? Well, there was this book by Jerry Bledsoe. Jerry Bledsoe also wrote Bitter Blood. Any of you ever read Bitter Blood? Now there's a scary book about this family and murder and all those sorts of things. But Bledsoe's book, Blue Horizons, is about him bicycling the Blue Ridge Parkway. And he pulls into the Mayberry Trading Post, and he runs into Miss Addie Wood. Miss Addie's gone now, but she lived to be well over 100 years old. And Jerry goes in, and she tells him this story that as a little boy, she remembered Andy Griffith very well. That he came in with his grandfather and his father, and that they traded with him. Well, apparently what they traded was like ginseng and roots and stuff, and for things out of the trading post. This building is well over 100 years old. And she told Bledsoe this. Well, Bledsoe puts it in his book. Well, in researching my book, one of the things I did was I went to Chapel Hill. Andy's papers are all at the University of North Carolina, where he went. And in his papers, lo and behold, is a copy of Jerry Bledsoe's book. And the paragraph where it describes this, that he got the name Mayberry from the Mayberry Trading Post, he's got it highlighted. And it's in his papers. And he doesn't say, heck no, this ain't true, or BS, nothing. He's got it highlighted, and it's in his papers. What's that say to y'all? It says to me, yep, I believe that's true. This is where he gets the name Mayberry from. Geneva, his mother, of course, is from Patrick County, Virginia. That's where this is. And this is Carl and Geneva's marriage license, which was in the Patrick County courthouse. So when they got married, they could probably get married at the bride's folks a lot of times. So I think they got married in Patrick County. That was his family. But I think Andy's grandfather took him to the trying to be Otis, I had very fond memories of him. Maybe Andy did too. And I think that's where he got the name. This place is still open. If you saw the Mayberry Man movie, it's in the Mayberry Man movie they made. But you can go visit it. And it leans a little bit. The building literally leans. But if you were 100 years old, you'd lean too. So that boy sure did have a head of hair, didn't he? Andy grew up here in Mount Airy. They eventually moved over to Haymore Street, the house where you could spend the night in now. When he first started, though, I think they went to Haymore Baptist Church, which is over here on Rockford Street. And I know this because I grew up going to Haymore Baptist Church, and we found Betty Wright wrote a book about Haymore Baptist Church, and in the book she found that Andy Griffith was in the plays the children did. She found his name listed in the plays, the Christmas plays the children did. Now, the Surrey Arts Council won't like me saying this, but I have a sneaking suspicion that Andy's first acting job was not in the Andy Griffith Playhouse, but in the Christmas play at Haymore Baptist Church. Now, I might be struck by lightning for saying that or something, but I really believe that's true. I know this because my first acting job was in the Christmas play at Haymore Baptist Church. Did I mention that was probably my last acting job? The Haymore Baptist Church. Well, if you know the story, Andy went to see this movie, and there was a guy in the movie who played the trombone, and this dude got all the women. So Andy thought, that's what I need. I need a trombone so all the girls will like me. So he saves up his money, he buys a trombone. Now, when I was growing up, you'd buy an electric guitar and learn some Led Zeppelin, you know, to get the girls to like you. But Andy gets a trombone, and he's looking around and he hears that the preacher, Reverend Mickey, up at the Grace Moravian Church has a band. And Reverend Mickey will teach you to play the trombone. Well, Andy gets on his bicycle, he rides up there to the church, knocks on the back door, and he and Reverend Mickey meet for the first time, and he talks Reverend Mickey into teaching him to play the trombone. And Reverend Mickey thinks that, oh, he'll never come back, ain't no way this kid's going. No, he came back. He came every week. And he learned to play the trombone. Next thing you know, Andy's playing every instrument in the band at the Moravian Church. Carl and Geneva suddenly go from being Baptists to being Moravians. The rest is history. They literally changed churches because Andy wanted to be in the band. I believe that is true. One story about Reverend Mickey that's in my book is years later he goes to Raleigh to be a preacher in Raleigh. And he and Andy they stayed in touch, and Andy talked to him on the phone one day, and Reverend Mickey was talking about how his lawnmower had broke and he needed a new lawnmower. Well, a week or so later, this guy shows up in the front of his house, knocks on the door and says, Reverend, I got you this new lawnmower. And Reverend Mickey's like, well, I haven't ordered a lawnmower. And well, sir, I got you a lawnmower here. You want me to take it back? And Reverend Mickey goes in. I don't know if he called the place that had a lawnmower. When he comes back, the dude has took off his disguise and it's Andy Griffith standing there. And he's bought his Reverend a lawnmower because he remembered how good the band was to him and how he helped him get started. So Andy needs to go to Floyd's. It looks like they're on the right. He had that head of hair the day he died, I believe. He really did. But anyway, there's how he ends up at Grace Moravian, and he's going to end up going to go to college. They were poor, so I think he got a scholarship, and then he ends up at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he lived in the steel dorm, which is right here on the left. And he changes his major because he doesn't really, I think, want to be a Moravian minister. And that causes a little consternation here in town, I think. But he does graduate from Chapel Hill with a music degree. One of the things he did was he played in the band at Carolina. And if you play in the band at Carolina, that means Andy sat there watching a lot of football games while he's sitting in the band. And this is going to come in handy as I take a big gulp of water here. During his time at Chapel Hill, he's going to start acting. He'll act there. He'll come home and act in plays. He ends up going to the Lost Colony, and over the years, he will gradually move up from probably a very unnoticeable understudy to where he's Sir Walter Raleigh here in this picture. And that's his first wife, Barbara, who also acted in the Lost Colony. And he's going to end up, of course, living right next door to the Lost Colony. If you've ever been to Manio, that's where his estate was. It's right down the street. from the Lost Colony. But after he graduates from Carolina, he starts teaching school. One of the places he goes is Goldsboro, North Carolina, and that's Andy actually teaching a class at Goldsboro High School. He lived just a block or so away from there in a house that I can only tell you looks suspiciously like the one on the television show. It's almost identical to the Taylor's house from the outside. My friend Wayne Jones gave me this photograph. Wayne's mother is in this picture, and she's actually one of Andy's students at Goldsboro High School. So while he's doing this, he and Barbara start developing an act, and from everything I've ever seen or read, that Barbara was kind of the star. She was the one who could sing and dance and do all this stuff, and Andy was kind of carrying her luggage for a while. Well, they started developing comedy routines and things like that, and they went around what I would call the rubber chicken circuit. They started going to the Rotary Club and all these places talking and doing their comedy routines and things. That's how you kind of get started while he's still teaching high school. Well, he develops some of these monologues. You know, he does Romeo and Juliet, he does Hamlet, and he comes up with what it was football. And he had been sitting there in the band at Carolina watching the football games, and I think that's where the germ of this comes in his mind. This is in the top right, it's actually him at a Carolina football game doing it before the game. Virginia Tech, where I went, we do Enter Sandman, where we jump up and down with Metallica blasting out. Carolina should have this before every football game. If they don't have that before every football game, there's something wrong with them people. But that's one of the funniest things that I've ever heard. And of course, this is what makes him. This becomes a huge comedy hit, and it makes him enough money that he and Barbara moved to New York. They had gone to New York before and had not been very successful, but after this, they are very successful. They have some money. They go up, and he starts trying out for things on Broadway. And one of the things he gets is No Time for Sergeants. And he did it on TV, he did it in movies, and he did it on Broadway. He did it 3 different ways. And of course, this is the movie. Him, and you'll recognize the dude here in the middle was also in No Time for Sergeants, and that's I think the first time he encounters Don Knotts. And this will be, of course, a lifetime friendship. He gets, he does Onion Head, he does several plays, movies, and things, and then he gets the chance to work with Elia Kazan. That's Patricia Neal in The Face of the Crowd, which brings us back to Mayberry and Andy Griffith Day in Mount Airy. Now, how many of you ever seen this movie, Facing the Crowd, 1957? Well, if you've seen it, you'll know this is not Andy Taylor, I promise you. He is absolutely a megalomaniac in this movie. It's one of the darkest roles I think he ever played in his entire life, and he is really good. I think he is really good. I think it might be the best acting job he ever did. But there he is. Will Stoddard, is that his name, or is that No Time for Sergeants? I'm getting so senile, I didn't remember.
No Time for Sergeants was Will Stockdale.
Stockdale. I thought one of us is late. But there he is facing the crowd. And if you do watch this movie, it may ruin Andy for you, but you'll think, man, that dude really could act. He really was serious about this stuff. And he never won an acting award, but I think if he had it, this would have been the one he should have won for. He's really, you know, he does Murder in Coweta County, he does dark roles and stuff, but this is the darkest, I think. Of course, in his film career, sir.
That was what movie was it that he played where he took and had them men to throw that body down into the well?
That's Murder in Coweta County, I believe.
Oh, okay.
That's a little bit later. And that dude who directed, produced that was here. He's always here for Mayberry Days.
Yeah.
That guy's
And
always.
that was
Johnny Cash
that was
is
a
in
good
that
movie.
Johnny Cash is the
Yeah.
sheriff, and he catches Andy and all that. Andy's career kind of levels out, and he gets a chance to do a television show, and it starts on the Danny Thomas show, where Danny Thomas pulls into this town and runs into a guy who's the sheriff, the justice of the peace. I think he's everything but the dog catcher and the Undertaker, but that of course becomes the Andy Griffith Show. And Sandra, since you've never really watched it, this of course is Jim Neighbors as Gomer, and Don Knotts is Barney Fife, and Andy is Andy Taylor. this show together. I don't know that I've ever seen anything funnier on television in my life than when the three of them especially are together on this show. Jim Abrams, of course, is gonna branch off and go on Pile, his own show. And Don Knotts will eventually leave after, I think, 5 years on the Andy Griffith Show. But those years that these guys are together, it's one of the funniest things I think I've ever seen. You don't believe me? Go watch The Haunted House, because they're all three in that one. Of course, the premise of that show is Otis is running a steal in the basement of the haunted house, so he's trying to keep everybody out of the haunted house by telling it's haunted and doing all this stuff. Opie's baseball goes into the haunted house, and well, 30 minutes of hilarity. And I think the thing that's great about that show shows it really well is Andy's the straight man. He realized, you know, that Don Knotts was the funny, and he was going to be the straight man, and he did. And it's hard to be the straight man because you don't get the credit. Maybe Don Knotts is going to win the Emmy Award after Emmy Award for Barney Fife, and poor Andy ain't going to win nothing. But Don Knotts was born to be Barney Fife. I don't think there's any doubt about it. But there they are, the three of them. Andy, of course, is married Barbara. They adopt 2 children, Samuel, and there she is. Some of you men probably have been attacked by this woman this weekend. Dixie Griffith herself, sitting on the running board of her daddy's car out in California. And Andy liked to collect antique cars. It's one of his passions. And there's little Dixie. She don't look that much different now. Andy and Barbara moved out to California in 1966. After apparently when my father ran them out of town, they he moved his parents from Mount Airy to California about the time my dad encountered him in the hospital pharmacy. Andy was married 2 more times. This is the second wife, and I can never pronounce her name. Somebody help me. And Cindy is his third wife. After the Andy Griffith Show, which ran for 8 years, went out as the #1 show on television. Who knows the other 2 shows that went out as #1? Anybody?
Gunsmoke?
No.
Maybe?
I Love Lucy and Seinfeld were the #1 shows when they went off the air in the Andy Griffith Show. Andy tried to reboot his career doing some television shows. None of them were real successful. I'll tell you something I love though. He did a couple of these movies where he was the sheriff in this Northern California town, and they were pretty good. I liked them. It's like when Tom Selleck did Jesse Stone. Any of you see Tom Selleck do Jesse Stone? I love Tom Selleck as Jesse Stone. Andy did these movies. Of course, Matlock is going to come along, and he's going to have that thing that very few stars have, a second reboot. And Matlock will become enormously popular. Him as the Atlanta lawyer. He'll bring back all kinds of people from the Andy Griffith Show. Don Knotts and Betty Lynn will be in it. He acts a little bit. One of his more famous roles is he's in this movie called Waitress with Kerry Russell. And he's this Kroll curmudgeon who likes to eat pie, and he's really good. He's really good in that. And his career, of course, you know, it's very seldom you get 2 chances at it. And with Matlock and Andy Griffith Show, he did. He did get 2 chances at it. Meanwhile, in Mount Airy, during the 70s, when I was growing up as a teenager, the economy kind of got pretty bad here. It wasn't too good. The factories started to close. We had furniture and textiles and the quarry, and things started to get a little rough. Well, Russell Hyde here on the left, Russell changes the name of his barbershop to Floyd's, and Charles Dow, of course, over there, invents the world famous pork chop sandwich. And next thing you know, people start thinking about Mount Airy as Mayberry. This is Emmett Forrest. Emmett was Andy's childhood friend. Emmett collected all things Andy. Andy would give him things. Emmett collected stuff for years and years. And most of what you see, I think, in the Andy Griffith Museum today is because of Emmett. So those 3 dudes were the ones I think kind of get this thing started and rolling. Emmett was, like I said, Andy's boyhood friend. people will say, another myth I'll knock down, people will say Andy never came back to Mount Airy. Well, that's not true. Andy Griffith came back to Mount Airy a lot. He just didn't tell you he was coming back to Mount Airy. Because he'd go over to Emmett's, and he'd stay with Emmett. I can't tell you how many people I know who say they were riding around town, they pull up to a stoplight, and somebody blows the horn, and they look over, and there's Emmett waving at them. And Emmett points to the back seat, and there in the back seat is Andy Griffith waving at him. And that happened all more than you would think it would. That really would happen more than you would think it would. So, Emmett was a great dude. I used to have lunch with him every once in a while. Emmett was a huge Civil War buff, and he loved to talk about Nathan Bedford for us, because he was Emmett for us. And he was great. Emmett passed away of cancer, and I saw him not too long before he passed away. And I, of course, had been a cancer survivor, and I asked him how he was doing. And this will tell you everything you need to know about Emmett. Come in and sit down. Emmett says, well, Tom, it's like this. I jump off the top of a 10-story building, about the 7th floor, you ask me how I'm doing. So far, the ride's been pretty good. But like I said, Emmett's the man who collected, I think, most of the stuff you'll see in the Andy Griffith Museum. And he deserves a lot of credit for that. Andy Griffith, I think, would be the first person to admit to you that he was not Father of the Year in real life. This is his son Sam. Sam's going to die. I think it was either alcohol or drugs. He did not have a good life in a lot of ways. Dixie, of course, is going to grow up. That's Dixie at the White House with her father when he gets the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Dixie goes to Colorado, and I think she's in real estate, and she has a few children of her own. Now, what you might say though, well, Andy might not have been that great a father in real life, but he was on television, was probably one of the greatest that ever was. And here he is with Opie. I don't know, any of y'all got a statue of your daddy going to the fishing hole? I know. The one I think about is when Opie kills the mama bird with the slingshot, and Andy forces him to face up, to what he did. And in the end, the birds grow up, and he has to release them to set them free and all that. And the best line in that shows, Andy says to him, "But don't the trees seem awful full?" Talking about the birds all singing around their house. So on television, I think you would say he was probably one of the greatest TV fathers that ever was. Let's talk about his legacy a little bit. Whatever happened to Opie? Ron Howard, of course, is going to go on to have an absolutely remarkable career. I, of course, remember him a lot as Richie Cunningham with the Fonz. You might not remember he was in John Wayne's last movie, The Shootist.
Yeah.
And of course, he went on to be, first time I think I ever saw him anything, he was in Music Man as a little boy. He was probably about 5 years old in Music Man, the Broadway play. And the thing I remember Ron Howard always said about was Andy Griffith, on the Andy Griffith Show, would listen to him. That if Opie had a suggestion, Andy wouldn't tell him, "No, shut up, Opie, we don't care what you think." Andy would say, "Well, what is it, Ron?" And Ron Howard would tell him, and like, how that's not the way a 10-year-old would say that. And he would tell him what he thought, and Andy would actually let him do it. And I've seen him talk many times about where Andy built this spirit of teamwork. And if you ever watch Ron Howard's movies, Apollo 13 comes to mind. Have you ever seen a movie where there's greater teamwork in the film than that? And I think that's what Andy Griffith maybe instilled in him. But he also has another legacy. This is Ron Howard's daughter, Bryce Dallas Howard. She was in The Help. I don't recommend eating the pie, but she did. If you've seen The Help, you know what I'm talking about. And of course, she's the woman who runs around from T-Rexes and high-heel shoes on all the Jurassic Park movies. And she's in all of them. But that's Ron Howard's daughter. She's redheaded, imagine that.
Oh.
Her mother and her father, up there in the top right, redheaded, so she, poor thing, she didn't have a chance. But that's, I guess you could say it's Andy Griffith's granddaughter. In a strange sort of way. And the thing about it is, if you want to see the difference, and I hate to besmirch another town, but I will, there's not hardly an empty storefront right here along the street. And you can say what you want, but I think a lot of that is because of Andy Griffith. I think the tourism that Mount Airy makes off of Andy Griffith is unbelievable. You want to see the difference? Go right over to Martinsville sometime and look at their downtown. Same size, textiles, furniture, no Andy Griffith. And I get a little fired up when people start talking about not wanting Mayberry, not wanting Andy Griffith in this town, because I think that's what we would have without him, is we would have a ghost town. And I'm not real popular sometimes when I say that, but I think that's the truth. I think the pictures here kind of prove that, don't they? You ever seen so many squad cars in your life as you did this weekend? Holy cow. Squad car tours has got 7 now. They ran 80 tours yesterday. 80 tours where people come to this town to ride around a squad car to hear about Andy Griffith. Now, I don't know too many places got that going on. This book is interesting in that I went around and did things. I got Mike that owns a squad car to tell me about how he came up with that idea to do that. There's a chapter in here about the history of squad car tours. There's a chapter about Betty Lynn moving to town. There's all kinds of people who have moved to this town because of Andy Griffith. Some of you maybe used to go to Mayberry on Main and see Darryl Miles in his Hawaiian shirt. I don't know if any of you knew Darryl. They moved from Indiana to open a Mayberry store in Mount Airy because of Andy Griffith. So I think he deserves a lot more credit than maybe some people like to give him for saving his hometown. I really believe that. Well, on July the 4th, 2012, when Andy had passed away, it was Donna Fargo, Calvin's cousin. Donna Fargo came home to be the Grand Marshal in the July 4th parade. Donna, of course, was the happiest girl in the whole USA. If you were a country fan, she had a couple of #1 hits, Funny Face and The Happiest Girl. And she came home to be the Grand Marshal. And I got to where I'll tell you a couple of stories about Donna. Donna is one of the most down-to-earth human beings for somebody who really maybe shouldn't be I have ever seen. She comes up to me right before this picture is made and says, "Honey, I heard you were sick. Are you all right?" Donna Fargo's worried about me. I saw her the day this picture was made. She signed autographs for, I think, something like 8 hours. Woman has MS. She signed autographs for 8 hours that day because she wasn't going to leave till everybody who wanted to see her got to see her. She did the same thing here a couple months ago again. She also has a real nice mural up the street. I don't know if you noticed that. But that's her. That's Debbie Cochran. Debbie was the mayor of Mount Airy when this happened. And I asked Donna, I said, "Did you ever meet Andy Griffith?" And she told me, no, I never met Andy. I met Goober, though. She met Goober on Hee Haw. So she was, like I said, the whole time I talked to her, all she wanted to talk about was Andy Griffith. So Donna, one of the classiest human beings I think I ever met. So I wandered around town that day, and this is one of the people I encountered. This is Patricia Comeyer, or as I like to call her, Pat, come here. And with her son Benjamin, and they live over in Martinsville, and they came over here, not for Mayberry Days, they came over here because Andy Griffith had died, and they just wanted to see what was going on. And I will read to you what she said to me that day. She said, "It's made me a little sad because I look at how things are now and wish so much that Benjamin could have those sweet, simple days. Tradition and home raising seem to be a dying art. For me, tradition, respect, and raising my child to love the Lord is natural. I just see how little of that is being instilled in children these days. And that's what Andy Griffith was to her. Benjamin is a grown man now. He went to UVA undergrad, and he's at Virginia Tech in grad school. Poor child must be very confused, is all I can tell you. But he's a great kid. She did a great job with him. Andy's last movie role was in this movie called Playing the Game, and if you've ever seen that movie, he's chasing Everybody Loves Raymond's mother around, while his grandson, this young fella here, is chasing all the young gals around. And in the last scene in that movie, I believe I'm right about that, Andy is fishing with his grandson. Imagine that. I wonder if they did that on purpose. Andy had a cousin, Evan Moore here, and this is kind of where I got the title for my book from. He said that Andy never left Mount Airy, he just plain took it to Hollywood with him. And I think you could say he probably took it to the world. He took it beyond Mayberry, yeah. The last time he was here publicly, he gave this speech. I forget if it was the road or the statue, I can never remember. They had two speeches for him, where they dedicated the Andy Griffith Parkway, and they dedicated the statue 2 different times. And he got up and gave this speech that day, and I was there. I know Calvin, were you there that day? I was there that day. And he got up and just started talking. I thought, they thought he was going to talk for maybe, 5 minutes, thank you. He just kept going. Andy just kept going. You can watch this up on YouTube if you want to. And he talked a lot about growing up here. He talked a lot about his father. And I realized how much Carl Griffith meant to him that day. I kind of realized that. And the last thing Andy said that day, he kind of denied that Mount Airy was Mayberry, and he had poo-pooed that idea and all that. Don Knox, a few years before that, had kind of spilled the beans on it and said that whenever they had a meeting, a writer's meeting, talking about things, Andy started coming out with all these things from Mount Airy, all these people, all these places and stuff, and Don kind of told on him. And so Andy, the last thing he's here is people started saying that Mayberry is based on Mount Airy, and he paused. He kind of looked off. I don't know, he was an actor, he was good, He kind of looked off into space. Sure seems like it to me. And of course they did the Parkway, they did the statue, the Andy Griffith Playhouse. And of course Andy Griffith got the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And I don't know that I ever saw him happier than the day he got that. And you can go up on C-SPAN and watch this ceremony. He got it at the same time as Jack Nicklaus got it, and Aretha Franklin. There was about 18 of them got it that day. But he got it when George W. Bush was president. And I just don't believe these two would have agreed much on politics about anything. But Andy, when Bush put this thing on him, Andy whispers to him, I can remember this vividly, he whispers to him, I met your daddy once. That sounds like a Mayberry thing. But here's what George Bush said about him that day. He said, here at the White House, we get an interesting mix of visitors. Already today, I've met with the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and the Dalai Lama, and the Sheriff of Mayberry. Andy Griffith first came to the people's attention with his gift for storytelling, and his own life is a mighty fine story by itself. He started out as a high school teacher, and in his amazing career, he gained fame as an actor, received a Grammy Award for his singing, and he will always be remembered for the Andy Griffith Show in Matlock. Yes, he's also remembered for his powerful dramatic performances in movies, such as A Face in the Crowd. Looking back on his Mayberry days, Andy explained the timeless appeal of the show. It was about love. Barney would set himself up for a fall, and Andy would be there to catch it. The enduring appeal of the show has always depended, and still does, on the simplicity and the sweetness and the rectitude of the man behind the badge. TV shows come and go, but there is only one Andy Griffith, and we thank him for being such a friendly and beloved presence in our lives. I don't know, that's pretty good, the president talking about you like that. Ladies and gentlemen, what happens in Mayberry stays in Mayberry. Christy McClendon's there on top. She does Charlene Darling and Angelina and stuff. And she walks up to me every year and she says, "Can I hug the pretty man?" She's been doing that now for 10 or 15 years, I believe. Now, I have a picture of her every year doing just this. And the thing that's funny about it is it's always her husband who's taking the picture. And he was walking around this year, Mike was walking around this year with a Hawaiian shirt that had Christy's picture on it. All over the shirt was Christy's picture. And of course, down here at the bottom is the fun gals. They got me. They give stickers now, rather than COVID, they don't kiss you no more, they'll give you a sticker. But Michelle there on the left, and who's Daphne, and Skippy, of course, is Dixie Griffith, Andy's little girl, who is all grown up now. And I have a picture of her every year like this, the two of them like this. And let me just tell you, these two are a menace to society, is all I can tell you. And I loved every minute of it.
I want to correct you. I got kissed by the one in the yellow blouse. I'm afraid.
No, the red one.
Oh, the red one?
Yeah, the blonde won't kiss you anymore, she gives you a sticker. The red one, I don't know what, she may take you home, you better. She may take you home. These two are hilarious. I mean, they are. And what I was going to say, the reason I have this slide up here is not to talk about them, attacking every man at Mayberry Days. But of all the people who come to Mayberry Days, I don't think anybody has more fun than Dixie Griffith does. I've never seen anybody that, her father never embraced it. He never came, but she does. She comes every year and she loves it. I mean, she absolutely loves it. She flies in from Colorado just to do Mayberry Days. She doesn't get paid to do it. She comes because she loves it. And obviously I do too. Oh Lord. So I was going to show you something, but I think I've gone a little long, so I won't do that. But I will tell you this, that I'm in all kinds of history. We have a Civil War general who's born right outside of town, James Stewart. We have an encampment up there in 2 weeks. And I have my books here, if any of you are interested in them, and some of the other books I've done. And if anybody's got any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. And I really appreciate you all coming out today, and thank you. Yes, ma'am. Andy, when he was doing the Lost Colony, he fell in love with Manio, North Carolina, out on the Outer Banks, and that's where he lived most of his adult life. There's a new book out about Andy and Manio, his relationship to town. The guy, John Reed, I actually have some of those somewhere, but he was written a book about it, talks about Manio. Andy lived in Manio, so he would be like anybody else in a town. He'd go to the grocery store, he'd go to restaurants, and from what I gathered, the local folks kind of took care of him. They left him alone. They didn't tell you where necessarily Andy lived and all this kind of thing. And they embraced him and took care of him. And I think he lived there, that's where he died. And he took most of his adult life. He lived out there in the area, loved it. But I think they were very protective of him. I think the people learned to be kind of protective of him. Andy, I think Andy, sometimes you hear all kinds of horror stories about people who went up to him and said something to him and didn't get him with exactly a warm and fuzzy response. And I think a lot of that has to do with on how you approached him. If you slapped him on the back and asked him where Barney and his bullet are, it might not go so well. But if you approached him in a respectful way, I think he probably was okay. But everything I've seen and heard is that the people in Manio, they kind of watched out for him. They didn't bother him. It's like he kind of lived incognito with them. It was the tourist you had to watch out for. It's the tourist. Well, Cindy owns the house. There was a story several years ago that she wanted to tear the mansion down. What she wanted to tear down, I believe, was the first wife's house, Barbara's house, not her house. She wanted to tear Barbara's house because I think it got somewhat dilapidated in shape. But she got a lot of bad press, I think, because of that, but I think she was just trying to clean up some of the estate stuff. As far as I know, the mansion that she and Andy lived in, and it was a mansion, is still there and is in fine shape. And you can't see it from the road, I think you can see it from the water. If you go around, Little Kyle, it's, you can see it from the water. Anybody else?
I have a question. As I remember, like the day that it was first announced, after he passed away, he was buried like within an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours at the most. Do you know why it was done so quickly?
I wish I had $1 for every time somebody asked me that question. I'd be Bill Gates. I think Andy had had heart trouble. I think they knew that he didn't have a lot of time. I think that he didn't want a massive funeral. He didn't want a big deal made about it. He was a very private guy in real life. I think that's why they had it already worked out, and that's why they buried him so fast. He didn't want a big to do about it. There's a story around Mount Airy that I think is true, is that he had actually at one time wanted to be buried in Grace Parade. But that's where Emmett's buried, and I think he wanted to be buried there. But he had kind of come back and he worked it out, and the preacher, apparently, one of the preacher up there had started telling everybody that Andy Griffith was coming back to be buried in Grace Parade. And Emmett found out about it, which means Andy found out about it, so he lost that idea that he wasn't buried in Grace Parade, which is kind of a shame, I think, that he's not buried here in Mount Airy. But I think they knew he didn't have a lot of time, and they had it all worked out. From everything I know, and I've never seen it with my own eyes, Andy was buried on his farm there in Manio with his dogs. He's buried with his dogs.
What was his dog's name?
He had a bunch of them. Apparently there was a whole little cemetery of all the dogs he had over the years, and that's where he's buried. And I don't even know if it's marked. I think it may be in the marked graves. But we don't know. You can't get in to see. But that's just one of the things that
Maybe he didn't want the press or something, maybe coming in for his funeral, so that's why he had made arrangements for him to be buried almost immediately.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it was. He was private, he didn't want a big scene, he was buried, and he would, you know, if they brought him back up here to Grace Parade and buried him, he would have been a scene. I mean, he would have been underway. Because, has anybody been to Grace lately? You know, I think it could have been something like that. And I think he didn't want that. He wanted to be buried privately and almost in secret. But from what I gather, he is literally buried with his favorite dogs. Anybody guess?
Are his parents buried in California or are they here?
They're buried in California. His first wife is buried in California. I went out there a couple of summers ago and went to the graves. I found the graves. His son Sam is buried in the same one of the forest lawns. And you can go to the reservoir where they filmed the opening of the Andy Griffith Show. It's a reservoir above the hills above Los Angeles. You can literally throw a rock in the pond if you want to do it, just like Opie did. And there's a lot of, I think where they filmed, almost everything where they filmed, it's gone. The back lot, which is, I guess, been Desi Blue Studios at one time, where they filmed all the Star Trek. There's so many hilarious things. You'll see Captain Kirk walking down the street, John Collins, and they walk right by him in his fixing shop. So you have the exact same, studio that they filmed Star Trek. But his parents are in California.
Did you say both, he had two children, Dixie and Samuel, and they were both adopted?
Yeah, they were adopted.
Did Samuel do any acting before he died?
I'm not sure what he did. I don't know a lot about him. I've never asked Dixie. You know, I guess I could ask Dixie, but I've never asked her about it because he didn't have a good evening. I don't like to remind her of that. I'm fairly good friends with her. Some of y'all may be very good friends with her. She's not too unfriendly, but I don't know.
And the two adopted children were not biologically
I think they
related,
might.
were they?
I think they might have been brother and sister in real life. I get confused about that sometimes because I'm getting senile myself and I can't remember. But they may have been brother and sister. I'm not 100% sure that they weren't. But they might have adopted them as brother and sister. But I've never asked her about it. y'all, if y'all would like to look at some of the books, please do, and I appreciate Cassandra and the museum having me. And, y'all have a good rest of your day. Everybody out figure just, well, the latest one I wrote, it's different. This is about all the controversies and statues and all that sort of stuff. This is more of history. How was that? I didn't play with it, I got to see it.
Well, I like that, I need to about 40. And I'm happy with that.
Hard brain, yeah. Hard.
Tell him something.
Yeah, I had almost twice, which of course mine was free.
Good job, and, you know, I like having that, that's why it's like.
I don't know if you'll be down next year, and I can actually advertise it, but I got to work 10 days.
You finally got to hear me actually talk in public, and I'm not the goofball that you probably thought I was.
And that means a lot. Have you worked with them before? Really?
The grandsons, when Amy's grandsons see me talk for the first time,
They got
they're like,
the best deals.
that's not the guy I know.
There's something really specific about how we both present things, it's Patrick County, and I don't know how to tell.
Well, I try to be very folksy, very down to earth. I
You
don't
get what I'm
want,
saying based on which presentation, like it's very.
I don't want conversation. I
Yeah.
thought you were very conversational, that's what I try to be, is I don't want to be too ivy tower.
I had to get her back, because we were running late, as we stayed together,
I
so.
try really hard to be.
It was there, I said,
You know, I'm big.
I'm just so disappointed you didn't win the dog.
Run out.
I was worried you're gonna walk up here one day and tell me he's gone. I was worried.
Well, that's
I just like you to let me know, so I'm not like looking for it.
like,
So I make sure we're gonna get back.
Yeah, I like that, you know.
That's $10 whole, that's what it
I'm
costs.
not, I'm totally with that, so you can also be good to know sometimes, or want something special.
He was on his, Facebook, I said, he had
That's
to
about,
go.
that's about our home county in the Civil War.
And it was everything.
I know you got the whole Patrick
Yeah.
County presentation.
I'm actually teaching a class about that over another place tomorrow, every Monday I teach a
Yeah.
class about that.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
said we wanted to be
I'm
playing.
teaching
Well, that was
classes.
further than I thought it was.
Second
I
one
thought
of
we were gonna
6
be able to
tomorrow.
walk. But then when I said how far it was, I thought, I don't believe we can walk this is too far. Well,
Oh, yeah, well, I'll be.
one of the girls really wanted to go, she was like, I don't think she'd been anywhere.
Yeah.
But no, they invited me to come, Daryl Holland is teaching this class
Yeah.
in the
Well,
morning, and I'm
that was
teaching it
good.
in the
That was
afternoon.
good.
And he's doing real broad strokes, and I'm being very specific. Okay, thank you.
I have, is this, Senator Allen's house?
Well, there isn't anybody.
Yes, I
The
have.
ones I knew are gone.
Yeah, I know, I'll bet, they got an open house.
Thank y'all. Have a safe trip.
Y'all be good. Love it.
Instead of waiting on that, sitting up,
So you've been to 3, which one did you like the best?
Danny Martin.
You like Daniel?
Danny Martin walked the dog with everybody. I've seen, in my last 24 hours, we had Tom at Ararat.
Well, man, Dan's heard me talk 3 times in the last 24 hours.
That's okay.
We had called him that morning, and we had him at the railroad. Then I go to Charlotte last night, we got here at church.
You said it's gonna be on the, it's on YouTube or what?
Yeah, we videoed the program we did this day, but that's Danny's one.
Then last night we sat through every church at PNC outdoor arena, right?
Lord.
Then I come back and I get this guy again. And
Yeah.
I'm sitting there in this chair, I'm going, you know what, I can't really think about Danny Martin.
Yeah.
So of all the things I've done in the last 24 hours, every church, Whiskey Myers, everything
Yeah.
Danny was my 9th grade algebra teacher, and I published that book
Oh
for
my
him.
gosh.
He was an investigator for the Patrick County Sheriff's Department, and he busted steals, it's one of the things he did.
71 years old,
Yeah.
busted his last deal.
2018, I think he said the last one was 2018, 5 years ago. But it's just about his career. Like I said, he was my 9th grade algebra teacher.
Who would have thought, right?
And thing about it is, he looks almost the same, as weird as that might be.
He's a little bitty frail man.
Yeah,
And I mean, he's just like the most unassuming individual you can see.
Really?
He's just like, and he come over and he started talking, and then like this little man was like, holy cow, he's huge. You know, like, how'd you do all that?
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. It was.
But he told stories about how, they catch people. He told a lot about Jimmy Rohr, who lived up there. Jimmy was ABC officer. Jimmy's the dude who'd hide out in the woods, try to catch you making moonshine. I don't know if he got any of your crowd, but he might have been looking for someone, I don't know.
And then he's a park ranger. He's a park ranger over at 30 Stone now. So he's been an algebra teacher. He's been he worked for the sheriff's department, and he's not even retired at 66. He's like, hey, we're gonna be a park ranger.
That's a kind of a joke. Ron Leonard, who's passed away now, Ron Leonard put this picture up on Facebook of 2 noms on Miles Mountain. So I wrote a book about, I put all the characters in Andy Griffith Show in the Civil War, and we blew the knob off. So that was only one.
I was gonna ask you in your presentation when you talked about Andy's mom working at the
Wienerberger.
Yeah, do you know that was Evan Moore's?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if you knew that or not.
I quoted
Yeah.
Evan somewhere.
Yeah, Evan and Ruby.
Yeah, but she apparently, Andy's mom apparently, when his movies were playing in her room, she would actually wait outside for people to come out. So I think she was signing autographs or something.
While we're heading back there, today was great. You done great.
Thank you.
It was worth it. Thank you for putting this all together. Thank you.
We'll have it back soon. We'll have it back
We're
in the
proud
spring.
of the boy.
Yeah, it's good. Good to know it's working.
Winter or spring sometime, we'll try to figure it
Yeah,
out.
pretty good. It's all right, good time to Well, he just needs a little technical skill, so he doesn't. Although scene can start to get a little funny every time they say scene, it's starting to get a little bit funny.
I was actually, now, you said that, you're confident that Dixie's in real estate, did you say?
Well, she was, I think she was in the station, she may be retired now, I haven't really. When Dixie's around, we don't really talk about what you're doing in Colorado, we talk about,
Miles, I was thinking, you told me, if that was from her, that she was working houses.
But she might, I think she might be doing that now, actually. I know she worked in real estate for a while, that's how she made a living. She has children and grandchildren and stuff. I think she would call like Colorado real estate. Yes, yes. I don't like it much. I know him, but he was here during Mayberry Days. He came up and talked to me. He says, I don't think I will ever talk to him here.
I think you could have said one time, he said, multiple times.
Yeah, he tried to imply that Andy was Mayberry, and that's just not true. Just not true. His whole premise to me is. But I told him. I don't either. I don't think that's true either. Yeah, he had quite a car collection.
Well, that thing was beautiful.
Yeah, he had quite a car collection, from what I gathered. I
I
know
wonder what year he married his third wife.
he was, he was married to her for a very long time. The middle wife, he wasn't married to very long. He was only married to her, I think about 5 or 6 years. I think the third wife, Cindy, he was probably married to her 20 or 30 years or more.
I know they were married in 2004, which is, they were already married in 2004, because
And
that's
for a
my
while,
first year here at Mayberry
they've been
Days.
married for quite a while, in 2004. I think he met her, she was an actress in Lost Colony. That's how he met her.
Oh, they were still married when he passed.
Yes, 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 they were still married. He was married to Cindy for a very long time. He was married to Barbara for a very long time. It's just the middle one he wasn't married to for too long.
He was quoted with his final wife, saying of her, she's a keeper.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's a keeper.
But, Cindy was a lot younger. I think she was a lot younger than he was. And that's, when he passed away, he was still married to her. And she, I don't think she ever comes up here, but she did when he came. But,
She's still alive.
yes, as far as I know. As far as I know.
She still lives in the house.
I think she stays there. I think she got a place in Key West too. I think she has a home in Key West. Because when Andy died, that's where I think she was, and she had to come back too. There's a car going up Main Street the wrong way.
Is there?
That's the third one today. I see up there on the right. They're turning around down the middle of the street, way up there. See them?
Oh no.
That's the third one today. I've seen
Yesterday
going the
was
wrong
bad,
way.
and I'm really surprised some people did not.
I was surprised the police didn't stop the traffic from coming towards the parade. At that
You
red
did.
light, they could have shot them over the hill.
Yeah.
But here they come to parade, and here come all these cars. I don't know what they were thinking. They weren't.
Shows that went out on top.
Oh, poor people.
One of the other was IROC and
Sidewalk.
yeah. Well, you know, the one actor encountered between Lucy and David Rivera. The only one that I know.
It's a both of them. I don't know off the top of my head.
And he was in town this weekend for Mayberry Days. He was in town. Plays the drums.
Oh, Thibodeau, whatever his name is. Yeah, Keith Thibodeau. I didn't know he was an Olive Lucy, but he was, wasn't he? He was a little fella.
Little fella, he
Yeah.
played the drums. I read years ago that he, probably in anticipation of his first visit here to Mayberry Days, that he was touring professionally as a drummer when he was like 3 years old. So he really, really good. When he played
But you're right, he was an Olive Lucy.
yeah, it wasn't trick photography or anything when he played the drums on Iron Force. That's a good way to play.
That's a great trivia question.
Pretty cool.
Excuse me just a minute.
Sure.
Turn this thing off.
You didn't put chairs away or anything?
No, I did it just a little bit. I got 2 comes in.